house was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the dishwasher. Lisa sat at the kitchen table, her fingers absently tracing circles on the rim of her wine glass. The dim lighting softened the room's harsh edges, but it couldn't soften the weight pressing on her chest. Across the room, David's phone buzzed against the granite countertop, the screen lighting up with yet another late-night work email. He didn't look up from his laptop. He hadn't looked at her all evening. "David," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Hmm?" he replied, still typing, his focus unyielding. "You didn't even ask how my day was," she said, her tone sharper than intended. His fingers froze on the keyboard for a moment, and then he sighed. "I'm sorry. It's been a long day. I've got this presentation tomorrow, and it's always tomorrow with you," Lisa interrupted. "Always some meeting or project or deadline. When was the last time we actually talked? Really talked?" David's jaw tightened, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Lisa, not tonight, okay? I'm trying to keep everything together here. For us, for this house, for what? A marriage that feels like a transaction?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. David closed his laptop with a muted thud, finally meeting her gaze. His brown eyes, once warm and inviting, now held a mixture of exhaustion and something colder, something distant. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, his voice low but firm. Lisa swallowed hard, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. "I want you, not this version of you. The you who used to look at me like I was the only thing that mattered. The you who couldn't wait to touch me, to talk to me, to be with me." David rubbed his temples, his frustration palpable. "People change, Lisa. Life happens. We can't always be—" "Bullshit," she snapped, her cheeks flushing with anger. "This isn't life. This is us, forgetting how to love each other." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening, filled with all the things they wanted to say, but couldn't. Finally, David stood, grabbing his phone and his laptop. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Lisa watched him leave, the sound of his retreating footsteps echoing through the house. She pressed her fingers to her temples, willing herself not to cry. Later that night, as she lay alone in their king-sized bed, Lisa stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with memories of what their marriage used to be. The late-night talks, the stolen kisses in the kitchen, the way David used to pull her close, even in his sleep. Where had it all gone? A flicker of desire sparked in her, unbidden and unwelcome. It wasn't for David, at least not the version of him she had now. It was for the idea of connection, of intimacy, of feeling alive again. She slid her hand beneath the sheets, her breath hitching as she let herself drift into a fantasy where she wasn't alone, where she wasn't invisible. Her fingers moved with growing urgency, the ache in her chest momentarily replaced by the heat building in her core. But even as she reached her peak, the emptiness lingered, a cruel reminder that pleasure without love was hollow. David, meanwhile, lay on the stiff mattress in the guest room, staring at his phone screen. A message from Sophia flashed on the screen. "Missed seeing you today. Hope you're okay." He stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. "Missed you too." As he hit send, guilt clawed at his chest. But it wasn't enough to stop him. He closed his eyes, imagining her. The way she smiled, the way her laughter made him feel young again. Desired. Free. But as the images of Sophia faded, Lisa's face crept into his mind, her eyes filled with hurt, her voice trembling with desperation. He turned onto his side, pulling the thin blanket over himself, and tried to ignore the hollow ache that settled in his chest. Neither of them slept that night. Lisa's alarm blared at 6:30 a.m., pulling her from a restless sleep. She dragged herself to the bathroom, her reflection in the mirror a stark reminder of the woman she had become, tired, worn, and invisible. As she brushed her teeth, her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Matthew. "How's my favorite person doing today?" A small smile tugged at her lips despite herself. Matthew had always known how to make her feel seen, even when they were just teenagers. She typed a quick reply. "Barely surviving." "You?" His response was immediate. "Let me take you out for lunch." "You deserve a break." Lisa hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. She thought of David, of their fractured marriage, of the promises they had made and broken. And then, with a deep breath, she typed, "Sure." 1 p.m.? As she hit send, a thrill of anticipation coursed through her. It was wrong, she knew that, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something other than numb. Across town, David sat in his car outside the gym, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. His phone buzzed with another message from Sophia. "Can't wait to see you today. Same time?" He exhaled slowly, his guilt battling with his desire. He knew he shouldn't go. He knew it would only make things worse. But as he opened the car door and stepped into the gym, he told himself it wasn't about Sophia. It was about escaping the suffocating reality of his life, even if only for an hour. Lisa arrived at the cafe a few minutes before 1. It was a small, unassuming place tucked into a quiet corner of town, the kind of place where no one would think to look for her. She scanned the room nervously, her heart thudding in her chest, until her eyes landed on Matthew. He stood to greet her, his broad smile as warm as she remembered. Time had been kind to him. His hair was streaked with just enough gray to be distinguished, and his easy confidence was magnetic. "Lisa," he said, pulling her into a friendly hug. His arms lingered just a second too long. "Matthew," she replied, trying to suppress the blush creeping up her cheeks. They sat across from each other, and for the first time in what felt like years, Lisa felt herself relax. They talked about everything and nothing. Her job, his recent work trip, the music they used to love in their younger days. "You haven't changed," he said, his eyes soft as they roamed her face. Lisa laughed, a hollow sound. "You're sweet, but we both know that's not true." Matthew leaned closer, his voice low. "No, I mean it. You're still Lisa. The girl who used to make me laugh so hard I couldn't breathe. The girl who made every room brighter just by being in it." Her breath caught. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "Matthew?" she started, but he interrupted her. "Are you happy, Lisa?" The question hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. She looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "I don't know," she admitted finally. Meanwhile, at the gym, David wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished his workout. Sophia was waiting by the smoothie bar, her radiant smile lighting up the room. She was wearing a fitted tank top and leggings that left little to the imagination, her confidence both intoxicating and intimidating. "Thought you were going to skip out on me today," she teased, handing him a protein shake. David smirked, taking the drink. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." Their banter was easy, playful, but beneath it was a simmering tension that had been building for weeks. Sophia reached out to brush a stray hair from his forehead, her touch lingering just a second too long. "You've been stressed," she said, her voice soft. "Yeah," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Work's been crazy." "And home?" she asked, her tone casual but her gaze probing. David hesitated, the truth on the tip of his tongue. It's complicated. Sophia smiled knowingly. Well, if you ever need an escape, you know where to find me. Before he could respond, she leaned in, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered, "You deserve to feel good, David. Don't forget that." As she walked away, David's pulse raced. He knew he should leave, but his feet refused to move. Later that evening, Lisa returned home to find David already there, sitting in the living room with a beer in hand and the television on but muted. "You're home early," she said, her voice neutral. "Yeah," he replied without looking up. The silence between them was suffocating, each of them consumed by the secrets they carried. Lisa set her bag down and went to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she poured herself a glass of wine. Matthew's words echoed in her mind. "Are you happy?" She wasn't. Not with David, not with herself, not with the life they had built that now felt more like a prison than a home. "Lisa," David's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Do you ever feel like we're just going through the motions?" he asked. Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. It's like we're here, but we're not really here. Does that make sense?" Lisa nodded slowly, her chest tightening. "Yeah, it does." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their unspoken truths pressing down on them. Finally, David spoke again. "I think we need to talk," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Lisa's stomach twisted. "About what?" "About us, about where we went wrong." Her throat tightened, and she felt tears welling up in her eyes. "David, But before she could finish, his phone buzzed on the counter. His gaze flicked to it, and for just a second, Lisa saw a flicker of guilt cross his face. "Go ahead," she said bitterly. "Answer it." David hesitated, then picked up the phone and turned away, his voice low as he spoke into the receiver. Lisa stared at his back, the wine glass trembling in her hand. She knew in that moment that they were standing on the edge of a precipice, and she wasn't sure if they would survive the fall. David ended the call and turned back to face Lisa. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he could see the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Who was it?" she asked, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Work," he replied, too quickly. She laughed bitterly. "Work? At this hour?" David's jaw tightened. "I don't have to justify every call I take." "No," Lisa said, stepping closer, her voice rising. "But maybe you should. Because whatever this is, David, it doesn't feel like a marriage anymore. It feels like we're strangers." "Strangers," David repeated, his tone cold. "You're one to talk. You've been distant for months. Don't think I haven't noticed." "Distant?" she snapped. "You don't even see me anymore. You come home, you work, you sleep, and I'm just here, invisible." David's chest heaved as he struggled to keep his composure. "Maybe if you stopped expecting me to fix everything, to be everything, we wouldn't be here." Lisa stared at him, her heart pounding. "You think I expect too much from you? All I've ever wanted is for you to care, to try. But you're too busy running to—" "To what?" David interrupted, stepping closer. "Say it, Lisa. You think I'm running to someone else?" The room fell silent, their labored breathing the only sound. Lisa swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to deny it, to avoid the question, but the truth was clawing its way to the surface. "Are you?" she whispered. David froze. He wanted to lie, to deny everything and push this moment away. But the weight of his guilt was unbearable. I don't know what you want me to say, he admitted finally. Lisa's knees buckled, and she grabbed the counter for support. You're cheating on me. David reached for her, but she stepped back, her eyes blazing. Don't touch me. I didn't mean for it to happen, he said, his voice trembling. I've been feeling so lost, and she, Lisa's voice cracked, the word a dagger. So, it's true. There's someone else. David closed his eyes, his shame written across his face. It's not what you think. Lisa laughed bitterly, her hands trembling. It's exactly what I think. Do you love her? No, he said quickly. It's not about love. It was a mistake. A mistake, Lisa repeated, her voice hollow. You didn't trip and fall into her bed, David. You chose this. David's shoulders slumped, his composure crumbling. You don't understand. I felt invisible too, Lisa, like I'm just a paycheck to you, a roommate. She made me feel alive again. Lisa stared at him, her heart shattering. Alive, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. And what am I, David? Dead? Is that what I am to you? Lisa stormed upstairs, her chest heaving with rage and despair. She locked herself in the bathroom and sank to the floor, her tears flowing freely. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out with shaking hands. Matthew's name lit up the screen. She stared at the message for a long moment before opening it. Thinking about you. Hope you're okay. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought of David, of his betrayal, of the emptiness that had consumed their marriage. Finally, she typed, I'm not. Can we talk? David, meanwhile, sat on the couch, his head in his hands. He knew he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But as much as he hated himself for what he had done, he couldn't bring himself to regret it completely. Sophia had been a lifeline in a sea of monotony, a spark in a life that had grown dull. But now, as he sat alone in the quiet house, the weight of his actions threatened to crush him. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was Sophia. You okay? You seemed off earlier. He stared at the message, his chest tightening. Slowly, he typed a response. I can't do this anymore. I need to figure things out at home. Her reply was immediate. I understand. But if you ever need me, I'm here. David set the phone down and leaned back, closing his eyes. He didn't know if he could fix things with Lisa, but he knew he had to try. The next morning, Lisa woke to the sound of her alarm, her body heavy with exhaustion. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the argument with David and the message she had sent to Matthew. David was already in the kitchen when she came downstairs, his face pale and drawn. He looked up as she entered, but neither of them spoke. The silence was suffocating. I'm going out, Lisa said finally, grabbing her keys. Where? David asked, his voice cautious. Out, she said sharply, slamming the door behind her. She drove aimlessly for a while before parking near the cafe where she had met Matthew the day before. Her heart raced as she texted him, Are you free now? His response came almost immediately, For you, always. Same place? When she arrived, Matthew was already there, his expression concerned as he stood to greet her. Lisa, he said softly, pulling her into a hug. She let herself sink into his arms, the warmth of his embrace soothing her frayed nerves. I'm a mess, she admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. No, you're not, he said, holding her tighter. You're human, and you deserve to be happy. As she pulled back to look at him, something shifted between them. His gaze dropped to her lips, and before she could stop herself, she leaned in. Their kiss was tentative at first, But it quickly deepened, years of suppressed longing spilling out in that single moment. For the first time in months, Lisa felt alive. Lisa didn't remember how they ended up in Matthew's apartment, but the ride there was a blur of frantic kisses, stolen touches, and whispered promises neither of them truly understood. Now, as she stood in his living room, her pulse racing, she hesitated. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her, but Matthew stepped closer, his hands gentle as they cupped her face. "You don't have to do this," he murmured, his breath warm against her lips. She met his gaze, searching for doubt, but finding only desire. "I want to," she whispered, her voice trembling. When their lips met again, it was as though something inside her shattered. The years of loneliness, the nights spent lying awake next to a man who didn't see her anymore, all of it dissolved in Matthew's touch. His hands roamed her body with reverence, his lips tracing every inch of skin as though he was memorizing her. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lisa felt wanted, seen, alive. Meanwhile, David sat in his car outside the house, his phone clenched tightly in his hand. He had spent the morning aimlessly driving, trying to work through the turmoil in his mind. Every corner of the house reminded him of Lisa, her laughter, her scent, the way she used to hum while cooking. Now, those memories felt like ghosts, haunting him with the life they had lost. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. Sophia again. "Thinking of you. Hope you're okay." He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, he typed a reply. "I can't do this anymore." Her response was immediate. "I understand. But I'll miss you." David exhaled deeply, a strange mix of relief and regret washing over him. He deleted the message thread, as though erasing it could undo the damage. Lisa returned home that evening, her hair slightly disheveled, her face flushed. She paused in the doorway, her breath catching when she saw David sitting on the couch, a half-empty beer bottle in his hand. "You're home," he said, his voice flat. "So are you," she replied cautiously. He stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "Where were you?" Her heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Out. I needed some air." David's eyes narrowed. "You've been needing a lot of air lately." "And you've been spending a lot of nights working late," she shot back, her tone sharp. The tension between them was palpable, the air crackling with unsaid accusations. "Lisa," David said finally, his voice low. "Are you seeing someone?" The question hit her like a freight train. For a moment, she considered denying it, but something in his tone, something almost pleading, stopped her. "Yes," she said quietly, the single word slicing through the silence like a knife. David's face crumpled, and he staggered back as though she had struck him. "Who?" "It doesn't matter," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "What matters is why." David laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "Why? Because I've been a shitty husband? Because I didn't see you? Is that your excuse?" "No," she snapped. "It's because I've felt alone for years. I tried, David. I begged for your attention, your affection. But you were too busy with your work, your damn phone, your—" "And what about you?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "Do you think I didn't notice the way you shut me out? The way you'd roll your eyes when I tried to talk to you? It wasn't just me, Lisa. We both let this happen." Lisa's chest heaved as she tried to hold back tears. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this. But you left me no choice." David stared at her, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. "So this is my fault?" "I'm not saying that," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "I'm saying I don't know how to fix us anymore." That night, they slept in separate rooms. Lisa lay awake in the dark, her mind racing with memories of Matthew, of David, of the life she had once dreamed of but no longer recognized. David, meanwhile, sat on the edge of the guest bed, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He thought of his father, a man who had taught him that emotions were weaknesses to be buried. He thought of his mother, who had spent her life trying to love a man who couldn't love her back. For the first time, he saw himself in his parents, and the realization made him sick. The next morning, David found Lisa in the kitchen, staring out the window with a cup of coffee in her hand. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned to face him, her expression guarded. "About what?" "About us. About everything," he said. "I don't want to lose you, Lisa, but I don't know how to fix this." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if we can fix this." David stepped closer, his voice soft. "But do you want to try?" For a long moment, Lisa didn't respond. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I want to try." The weeks that followed were a tumultuous mix of raw honesty and painful revelations. Lisa told David about Matthew, and David confessed to Sophia. The admissions were like salt in an open wound, but they also forced them to confront the cracks in their relationship head-on. They started therapy, where they learned to communicate in ways they never had before. They talked about their childhoods, their fears, their desires, both spoken and unspoken. It wasn't easy. There were days when they wanted to walk away, when the pain seemed too great to bear. But slowly, they began to find their way back to each other. One night, as they lay in bed, David reached for Lisa's hand. "Do you think we'll make it?" he asked. Lisa turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but for the first time, I think we have a chance." Therapy forced David and Lisa to confront their ugliest truths, the fears they'd buried, the lies they'd told themselves and each other, and the lovers who had become escape routes instead of solutions. The confessions were excruciating. Each one reopened wounds, yet, paradoxically, they began to heal in the light of honesty. But healing wasn't linear. One evening, after a particularly tense therapy session, David sat in the car outside their home, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Lisa had revealed her lingering feelings for Matthew. Not love, she'd said, but a yearning for the version of herself she felt when she was with him. Carefree, desired, whole. David's stomach twisted as he thought of Sophia. The vibrant, carefree woman had been everything Lisa wasn't in their darkest days. But she wasn't Lisa. When he walked through the door, Lisa was sitting at the dining table, a glass of wine in front of her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks blotchy from crying. "We need rules," she said without preamble. "Rules?" he asked, setting his briefcase down. "If we're going to keep doing this, if we're going to survive, we need boundaries. No more Matthew. No more Sophia." Her voice cracked on the names, but she straightened her spine, refusing to crumble. "And no more lies. Ever." David nodded, his throat tight. "I agree. No more lies." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their mutual promise pressing down on them. Finally, Lisa stood and walked over to him. "Do you still want me?" she asked softly, her voice laced with uncertainty. David stared at her, his heart aching. "More than anything," he said, pulling her into his arms. Their kiss was slow and tentative at first, but it deepened with an urgency that surprised them both. It was as if they were rediscovering each other, peeling back the layers of resentment and pain to find the passion that had once burned so brightly. In the weeks that followed, David and Lisa embarked on a journey to rebuild not only their marriage, but also their individual selves. Therapy became a lifeline, but so did their willingness to explore parts of themselves they had long ignored. One night, after a particularly open conversation about their sexual desires, David suggested something bold. "We've spent so long ignoring what we want," he said. "Maybe we need to stop being afraid to ask for it." Lisa's eyebrows rose. "What are you suggesting?" "Honesty," he said simply, "even in bed." Their intimacy that night was unlike anything they'd shared before. They abandoned their inhibitions, speaking aloud their fantasies, their fears, their deepest needs. The rawness of it was terrifying, but it was also electrifying. For the first time in years, Lisa felt truly connected to David. Not just physically, but emotionally. And for David, holding Lisa in his arms afterward, he realized that this was what he had been searching for all along. Not Sophia, not an escape, but a way to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. Despite their progress, not every day was a victory. There were setbacks, moments when resentment bubbled to the surface, when the pain of their betrayals threatened to undo everything they had built. One night, after an argument about something as trivial as who forgot to lock the front door, Lisa found herself calling Matthew. His number was still saved, though she had promised herself she would delete it. The call went unanswered, and she was relieved. But the fact that she had dialed it at all left her feeling hollow. The next morning, she confessed to David. "I didn't talk to him," she said quickly, "but I tried. I don't know why. I felt like I couldn't breathe, and I panicked." David's face was unreadable as he absorbed her words. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. Lisa's chest tightened. "Are you mad?" "I'm not happy," he admitted. "But this isn't going to be easy. We both knew that." His calmness surprised her, and in that moment, she realized how much he had grown. Months later, David and Lisa stood side by side in their therapist's office for what might be their final session. "So," the therapist began, her pen poised over her notepad, "how do you feel about where you are now?" Lisa looked at David, a small smile playing on her lips. "Better. Not perfect, but better." David nodded. "We're learning. Every day. And I think we're starting to understand each other in ways we never did before." The therapist smiled. "That's progress. The choice now is whether you want to keep moving forward together or apart." That night, as they sat on the couch with a bottle of wine, David reached for Lisa's hand. "I know we still have a long way to go," he said, his voice soft. "But I want to keep trying. With you." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "Me too," she whispered. The story didn't end with a neat resolution. There were no guarantees, no promises of a happily ever after. But as they sat together, hands intertwined, they knew they had something they hadn't had in years: hope. And for now, that was enough. As David and Lisa sat together, their hands intertwined, it became clear that their journey was far from over. Theirs was not a story of perfection, but of perseverance, a testament to the complexities of love, betrayal, and forgiveness. Infidelity shatters trust, yet it also forces a reckoning with truths long buried. For David and Lisa, the path forward was not a return to what they once had, but the creation of something new, built on honesty, vulnerability, and effort. This story is a reminder for anyone facing similar struggles to pause and reflect deeply before taking life-altering decisions. Infidelity, though devastating, does not have to define your future. Whether you choose to rebuild together or move on separately, the journey must be guided by clarity, lessons learned, and faith in yourself, in God, and in the possibility of healing. Forgiveness is not just for the other person. It is also for you. It is the key to unlocking the chains of anger and self-doubt. Healing is a gradual process, one that requires patience and compassion, not just for your partner, but for yourself. If you're facing such a saga, take a step back. Detach, think deeply, and pray for God's guidance. Trust in His wisdom to lead you down the right path, even if it feels uncertain. And once you've chosen your path, walk it boldly, knowing that every decision comes with opportunities for growth and redemption. Let the lessons you've learned be a beacon, not a burden. Use them to break free from the cycles that threaten to repeat, and let them guide you toward a future that is not just survived, but lived fully. If you've been touched by this story, or are struggling with the weight of similar challenges, know that you're not alone. Take time to reflect on your next steps with a clear mind and an open heart. Speak to a trusted friend, a therapist, or a spiritual guide to help you navigate the complexities of your emotions. Healing takes time, but you are capable of it. Believe in your worth, trust in God's plan, and remember, every ending is a new beginning waiting to unfold. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you'd like to share your thoughts, reach out, or explore more stories that provoke reflection, stay connected. Your story matters, and your healing is possible.